the keynote speaker, the TVET governance and capacity building strategies. The speaker, Dr. Kazi Khalikuজ্জামান Ahmed, Chairman, Polli Karmashayo Foundation. Another keynote speaker, Professor Dr. A.C. Schroeder Thomas, Chair of the International Cooperation in Education and Event System, Technical University of Dortmund, Germany. May I request our keynote speaker, discussions, and special guest and chief guest. Is Professor Dr. Schroeder Thomas. The Chairman Governing Body of Polli Karmashayo Foundation, PKSA. A participant in the Bangladesh War of Liberation in 1971, he worked in the planning cell of the Bangladesh government in exile. In a career spanning over 5 decades, he has extensively participated in research activities, dialogue nationally and internationally, covering different social, political, economic, environmental aspects and issues of sustainable development as they relate to Bangladesh and other developing countries. Dr. Ahmed has studied a wide range of research works and publications, including authored, co-authored, edited, and co-edited 38 books, offered 25 articles, research report, and papers at home and abroad, including on policy planning, rural development, poverty reduction, human development, technology employment, gender issue, regional cooperation, water resource, environment, and climate changes. He has received many national and international awards, including Ekoshe Padak 2009, one of the highest Bangladeshi national civilian awards presented by the government of Bangladesh, and is a member of the team that contributed to the award of Nobel Peace Prize to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change IPCC in 2007. May I request Dr. Kazi Khalikuজ্জামান sir to present the paper.
Thank you very much for the introduction, but that was much too long. It could have been just 1 minute. Mr. Chairman, Honorable Chief Guest, fellow speakers, participants, ladies and gentlemen. I'm of those old-fashioned persons. I can't present on the basis of PowerPoint, so I'll just speak. The topic is rather contentious: governance and capacity for TVET. You know, human capability and technology are the two elements which are extremely important in the process of development. Each country will decide on those issues on the basis of their realities and the vision for development. In Bangladesh, however, TVET was not given much importance or attention until recently. And yet, we have been able to do tremendously well in achieving MDG targets. You have probably been discussing that and know that, so I am not going into details. We have started late and we should finish by 11. So I'll be just making some broad points. Our poverty has been reduced very significantly. It's now down to 24% from about 40% some 10 years ago. And extreme poverty is about 12%. But in terms of numbers, still large, because we have a very large population. So it's about 40 million. 40 million poor people and about 20 million extreme poor. However, we are pursuing policies not only for economic development but also poverty reduction and improvement in the quality of life of the people who are at the lower end of the spectrum. Economic growth has also accelerated. It has been about 6% over the last 7 or 8 years, over 6%. And this year it has gone up over 7%. We are, as I believe, and I have said it, and I have reasons I can't explain here. I believe that we are now ready to take off. But takeoff has to be managed. So there are certain things which have to be done to be able to take off. And if we don't manage those things, the takeoff will not be smooth. In the meantime, also we have initiated the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This requires that everybody is to be included, nobody to be excluded. And here, we have accelerated economic growth on the one hand, we have reduced poverty, and now we are going to have a process of development where everybody will participate. So that's the main issue here. Now, in order to move to a higher trajectory of development and go along the path of sustainable development, we need several things to do. One critical one, and that's what I'm going to speak on, is the human capacity, human capability. So, skilled manpower. So that's what is important. Of course, technology cannot be forgotten, and many other things cannot be forgotten. But I'll just be speaking on this human capacity. Now, if we move along in the path of sustainable development, we must focus on the downtrodden, who are the poor, extreme poor, and people who are just above the poverty line may any time fall below it. So those are the people I call downtrodden. So we have to focus on them. So the rich can take care of themselves, although they need institutional and policy support. But these people need support in many other ways. There are particular groups among the downtrodden which have different dynamics, different realities, and therefore one policy will not do. The policy has to be focused on the groups that we are trying to work with. And for example, there are the people with disabilities, people who live in coastal areas, in the islands, in more difficult areas like House, the depressed areas, water. So these are the people which need to be given most support in order for us to be able to move along the path of sustainable development. Because these people have to be brought into the process of development. Now, the human capability has to be improved for them, all these people. And there comes TVET. And it's extremely important that we organize things in a manner that these people are encouraged and facilitated to be able to participate in the process of TVET. Now, if we look at the economic sectors, agriculture is still the mainstay of the economy. About 45-7% of our labor force still in agriculture, and many more indirectly. So directly, indirectly, quite a large part of the labor force. It also provides food, which is extremely important. You know, that's elementary economics, that food comes from agriculture. Also raw material comes from agriculture. But one important thing is the demand for products from other sectors comes also from agriculture in a large way. So agriculture, although in terms of contribution to GDP, it is down to about 15-16%, but it's still extremely important, and its management has to be proper so that agricultural growth is sustainable and it is participatory. But for sustainability, we need to industrialize. And industrialization is the whole spectrum. The high-tech industries should be given due importance, but at this stage of development in Bangladesh, the most important part is, I think, micro enterprises and small industries, where the downtrodden can participate. They cannot participate much in the high-tech part, although some can, but generally they don't. So emphasis is needed on micro and small enterprises. ICT, of course, is extremely important. It cuts across all the sectors. There are informal sectors in both urban and rural areas which need to be upgraded. For doing all of these, we need people. First of all, we need investment, but even if we can invest, that has to be managed. That has to be utilized properly, and therefore we need people, skilled manpower. Also, at the same time, I must not forget that technological upgrading is necessary. There also you need more skills to be able to manage that. Now, Bangladesh, as I said, this Tibet was neglected rather some years ago, but now there is an emphasis and many initiatives have been taken to reform this sector. And these include, there is legislation, there is a National Education Policy 2010, which emphasizes vocational training, then Skill Development, National Skill Development Policy 2011, then establishment of National Technological Vocational Qualifications Framework, a quality assurance system, and new competency-based training courses. Now on the governance, we have National Skill Development Council chaired by the Prime Minister, and this executive committee chaired by the Secretary of Education and the representative of the private sector. And this is the operational part of the governance. Then there are the industrial councils, skills councils, to provide liaison and cooperation between the industry and the government. The ICSS have been established in many sectors, and also there are in some sectors called the sector working groups that have been established for the purpose. Now, external support also is available from ILO, and also TESDA from the Philippines. The Technical Education and Skills Development Authority of Philippines, some people have been trained there. So this is also gathering momentum. And I believe the cooperation, South-South cooperation will be strengthened. That I think is important, not only for Tibet, but many other purposes. And there are many institutes which provide training, both in public sector, private sector, and also run by NGOs. But the quality of training, there is still a lot to ask for, and also the equipment and other facilities in these training institutes are not adequate. Now, I believe that youth has to be the focus of Tibet. If that's so, we have a huge task at hand and a huge opportunity also. Bangladesh is passing through a phase of demographic transition, which is called demographic division. We have over 50 million youth from 18 years to 35 years, over 50 million. And below 15, and 56 million who will be joining as youth in the process in the years to come. So we have a phase of development where we have an extremely opportune moment that we can utilize, and Tibet can play a very, very important role in this context. Now, I'll take 2 or 3 minutes just to give you a practical thing that's happening in Bangladesh. Polygon Shayak Foundation, of which I have been mentioned as being the chairman, has a program which is integrated skills and enterprise development. So where we train people, we provide them with access to technology, we assist them in the marketing of their products, and we provide funding. Enterprise, and this is very successful. It's going on. It's a package. It's not just one thing, and they are supervised and monitored very closely. So they're doing quite well, and in 2-3 years, the stand of their feet, and then they go to bank and borrow more money. We cannot provide much money. Only Kurmashayak Foundation wants a microcredit organization. It's no longer that. It's a appropriate credit, and we provide up to about $12,000–13,000 for the enterprises. So this is something that we are doing, that is the package thing that I want to emphasize. It's not just training only. If train somebody and does not get a job, they get frustrated, and others are discouraged. So training is to be linked with employment, and therefore industry linkage is extremely important. And this is something we are doing. It's very successful. We are training youth in both human quality development as well as expertise on certain aspects of their interest. And then we provide them with other facilities. So our youth program is also, we have already trained 30,000 youth, and another 20,000 will be trained within this year. In addition, the Skills for Employment Investment Program of the government, PKSF is participating. We have already trained 10,000, and another 3,000 will be trained, and the 10,000, most of them have already got jobs. Because this program has a requirement that 70% of those trained must be provided with jobs by the trainers. But in our case, we have been able to make it almost 100% in certain trades. So training, education, training, and employment has to be linked up. Now, a comment on governance. Now, what I have said very briefly, said we have a governance structure in place now. We have a capacity also, but there's still a yawning gap. We need many more people to be trained. And as I said already, that the youth, these large numbers, they are unemployment or underemployment. Many of them are underemployment. If they can be put to use through TVET, they will be able to contribute to the process of sustainable development in a very meaningful way. So sustainable development in a large part depends on the youth of this country. If they can be provided with training and facilities, they can contribute greatly. Now, I suggest a way forward, and I believe the best way forward is a strategic approach has to be adopted, a strategic approach. And that means that demand has to be assessed of various skills at various levels in various industries. That has to be assessed properly. There is no assessment yet. There are assessments of certain parts here and there, but not a comprehensive way. That's necessary. Some countries did that, this strategic approach. And based on that assessment, we have to estimate what more capacity we need, and then action programs designed and implemented. And I suggest that has to be on the basis of a crash programming approach. We have to complete this within 2 years or 3 years, not just start and it goes on and on and on, years and years, and we don't see the end of it. So that's necessary. But there are challenges. I just mentioned them and finish. Many challenges in the way. As I said earlier also, if you want to move on to a higher trajectory of development and move forward sustainably, you have to manage certain aspects. Just like a plane, when it takes off, it manages. So it has to be managed. Now here, issues which have to be managed are quite a number. One is the institutes I have already mentioned, they are not properly equipped, and trainers, that's a gap. We need more and more qualified trainers. Absence of monitoring and evaluation. That's another critical area. If what is being done by these institutions is not monitored and evaluated from time to time, one doesn't know what kind of training they are receiving. Also, shortage of equipment, as I said earlier, that's another challenge. I have mentioned it, but let me mention it again. A challenge is linkage between employment and training. That's a big challenge. We have not been able to attract many people in this Tibet so far. Only 13% of the students. It used to be, of course, 2009 only 1%. There is an increase, but 13% is not much. And the target of the government, as far as I know, is 20% by 2020. So if this target, even if it's fulfilled, I think it is still way short of the need. But we should at least fulfill this target. Then to attract female candidates for training, it is necessary to provide facilities that they need, like washroom, etc., and other facilities they need. To attract the disabled people, we need facilities, people with disabilities, so that they can come and move about and use facilities there. For foreign employment, I think it is now time for us to do a very comprehensive survey to find out which countries need which kinds of expertise, so that to provide that, not just have for that matter. It has to be done in a systematic way. The important thing is that there has to be a coordination between the educational institutions and Tibet institutions. If there is no coordination, then you may not be able to achieve what you want. They have to have a background in their education for coming to Tibet. And education policy, as I said, emphasizes vocational training, and right from class 6. So 6 to 8. Now it has been relaxed that vocational training institutions, one can go even below class 8. And the government has a plan to establish a vocational training institute in each upazila, 491 of them. And this is in progress. I hope this will be. And final point is, there are about 22 ministries, I am told, which are implementing Tibet through institutions under them. And there is very little coordination among them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for sharing your knowledge, expertise, and wisdom. I think the next presenter, Professor Dr. H.C. Schroeder Thomas, Chair of International Cooperation in Education and TVET System, Technical University of Dortmund, Germany. The short biography of the professor. Professor Schroeder is the Director of the Institute for the General Education and Vocational Education at TU Dortmund University. And he holds a full professor at the Chair of International Best Vocational Didactics and Curriculum Development, Validation of Informal and Experiential Learning, and the Development of TVET System in an International Context. In September 2016, Professor Schroeder was awarded an honorary doctoral degree from Raja Mangala University of Lamna, Thailand by Her Royal Highness Princess Mahachakri Srindhom from Thailand. From 2011 to 2014, Professor Schroeder worked for the Deutsche Gesellschaft für internationale Zusammenarbeit GmbH as Director of the RCP Secretariat located at Tongji University, Shanghai. Professor Schroeder is the Editor-in-Chief of TVET at Asia and a member of the RAPTE Advisory Board. May I request Professor Dr. Schroeder Thomas, please sir, if you can finish by 15 minutes, it would be highly appreciable.
Yes, I'm a professor at Technical University of Dortmund, a professor for vocational education, and so we're looking in both fields. We're looking at in-company vocational education and formal vocational education at vocational schools and colleges, and we are active internationally. We cooperate with colleagues from Southeast Asia, and since Southeast Asia is not very far away, I hope that some of the things which I will share with you will be fruitful for you. And this is more or less reflecting the status quo of what we've been discussing for now 6-7 years in the context of TVET development in Southeast Asia. Okay, it's what we need to be aware of is that, and I know you are aware of this, there's a continuous change of almost everything. There's a continuous change of the world of work. There's new knowledge, new technologies. IT, information technology, is hitting in very strongly, and it's shaping the work organization, and TVET needs to respect this. And basically all different sectors, be it agriculture, be it aeronautics, be it, I don't know, bricklaying or construction. It's basically, to a certain extent, changing the world of work. It's not only IT, it's more than that. And we need to respect this. We need to change according to this trends, societal trends and technological trends, and therefore we need to understand the TVET systems, be it here or in Germany or elsewhere, continuously have to adapt to those changes in society and changes in technology. And the question we are always discussing is it good to have a benchmark? Is it good to say, well, Germany has a beautiful TVET system and that's why we want to have a TVET system like this? Or is it rather good to think of how can we develop our own system according to our own needs, with our own pace and in front of our own culture? And change is something which is always very stressful for people, because you need to change your attitude and you need to learn something new. Basically, it's something where everybody has to sometimes overcome anxieties and be open to new developments. So if we look normally sorry for the formatting, on our TVET system, then we basically talk about TVET operation. We talk about vocational schools or colleges, we talk about training centers which are often operated by industry, and we talk about workplace learning. So we basically have within TVET 3 different learning venues. So that's what we focus on. And we look at the elements and we say we need a curriculum, we need assessment, we need teacher training, training of trainers, we need equipment and learning places. So we look always separately at different elements. And then we have, we want of course the students, the learners which underwent a TVET program to successfully enter the labor market and to find a place in society. We, with respect to the situation in Germany, would call this then here the dual vocational training system. And we have the policy level, and what we observe often is that there is a gap between policy level and the operation. Clever and intelligent strategies, but how do we transform these strategies into operation? That's always a question. And here at the administrative level, we believe, with our colleagues from Southeast Asia, that we need to enhance this level of people, of administration, of policy transformation in order to make it operational. So I just show you this because this is basically the field of my academic discipline. I have to look from policy level down to operational level, and to see how can we contribute from our position as academics, as a group of people in our society who is in charge for research, how can we employ research approaches which enhance the development process. Of course, there's always an international policy transfer. I know many intergovernmental organizations are active in consulting with respect to TVET policies and TVET strategies. And there are always societal groups, lobby groups, who have an interest in changing, influencing the policy. This has changed a little. What we are discussing with our colleagues from Southeast Asia is what role can universities play here in the development of TVET system. And of course we can offer programs, but if all this is cleverly designed and designed in a way that they play together, our role could be as well, or often is in some countries, to be included in research projects and action research projects where we implement innovation at TVET level together with practitioners, where we implement and do research on this, and finally generate new knowledge which can be disseminated. Dissemination of knowledge is important and is an underlying, it's a basis, it's a foundation for development. It's just one piece which is necessary for development. So the question is, do we have this? Do we have established vocational education as an academic discipline? Do we have this group of people in our society who is in charge for an ongoing adaptation of new trends in the TVET system and ongoing development of TVET system? At the same time, of course, those people with their own background, their own national and cultural background, are able to generate recommendations for their policy level. And what we've experienced in Southeast Asia is that our colleagues with their own recommendations and results approach the line ministries, it has a higher impact and it increases the sustainability of change. And of course, those people here at this place at university being in charge of vocational education as an academic discipline, scientific discipline, they of course can not only generate knowledge, they can look for knowledge which is already available and use it and employ it in their own national background. For those two groups we need to target and we need to strengthen from our point of view. As well, in addition to all the other groups which are needed in order to make a TVET system operational. What I try to say is, TVET is a complex societal task, and of course the operation and the TVET provision is the vast majority, but the entire system is more complex. And this needs to be transferred in all different sectors, which is a very complex societal task, which needs lots of societal and government actions and efforts. So the question is, what kind of research approaches can be used and can be employed? And then we have, as I already mentioned, this the question, how can we support development, and how can we support development in a sustainable manner? And then, of course, we want to enhance this by combination with capacity building of all those which are involved in the actual process. And we want to achieve sustainability. We want to capacity building with respect to teachers, trainers, managers, and scientists. Involvement of different stakeholders like industry. The more stakeholders you involve, that's our experience, the more sustainable it will be. You know the image of TVET isn't necessarily the best, but the more stakeholders you involve, the more elements of society are involved, the more the image will increase, because everybody who was involved will basically support the idea of TVET. So that's the underlying idea of our research, of our understanding of research, which will enhance development. It's based on clear tasks and objectives, and it's basically a work-based learning, which will happen in cooperative action research. And this is what we've discussed in one workshop yesterday on teacher education as well. A modern teaching approach, you aim at what you want is, you want high quality of the outcome, you want efficiency of the laborer, you want a laborer, that's the image of man, you want a laborer who is able to solve problems, you want him to be, or her to be creative, innovative. The precondition is critical thinking and the capability of being able to anticipate work processes, not just doing, anticipating, and of course to think in the category of continuous improvement with respect to work processes, but lifelong learning, which is continuous improvement with respect to own personality, own person. So this process is pretty clear. You enter a process. It's experiential learning, and the idea is how do you combine the process of working and the experiential learning process? How do you combine this cleverly with input? When you work now, when you are in your work processes, so how do you get your knowledge which you will need in order to solve a problem? And this would be the normal way of learning. You don't learn redundant content, you learn the content which you really need, and while doing so, So there are basically two approaches. It's this lateral approach of cooperative action research. You have some very good institutions here in the region, so cooperate with them, conduct research with them on the regional level, especially with respect to standards, common standards, that's necessary, and exchange your best practice examples. And then you have this vertical approach of cooperative action research where you work together with your national partners. There's one best practice example. It's the Regional Association for Vocational and Technical Education, which is now based in Thailand and Chiang Mai. And there are now 27 universities from 10 countries, and they conduct research together. They exchange a lot, and many things have happened, including national reforms. And I think this is a way to enhance your own development process, to exchange with other partners who've already made many experiences from your region. And maybe just perhaps a little, to take a shortcut here, they have this journal TVET at Asia, maybe you want to have a look at them. This is an instrument of dissemination with respect to certain topics, TVET, and it's free for the authors and for the readers. It's based on the idea to support development by exchange of knowledge. Okay, well, maybe recommendations to boil this down to two things. One point is that we believe that vocational education has to be an academic discipline. It has to which needs to be implemented at university level. The state has to arrange this. The state has to have an interest. Society has to have an interest. And we believe that the employment of action research, like entering the entire process, will enhance development through what scientists are for, through conducting research and describing best practice and dissemination of new knowledge, which can be employed in other situations as well. And I think, though I know that sustainable change, sustainable development has to be an ongoing process which is conducted by those who are actually involved to find your own solutions. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Schroeder. Now, may I request Mr. Robert Wood, the special guest and also paper presenter, and he is the Mr. Wood is the Joint Melbourne Polytechnic as Chief Executive Officer in 2015 prior to commissioning Melbourne Polytechnic. Rob has 25 years experience in the public and private sector with numerous executive roles, including Deputy Minister of Education in British Columbia, Canada, Deputy Minister of Community Services in Nova Scotia, Canada. He also had held executive roles as Assistant Deputy Minister of Port Services and Executive Director of the Ministry of Housing and Social Development in British Columbia. And he has also spent 10 years in the private sector telecommunications. Rob holds a bachelor degree of Arts in Political Science and Master degree in the Public Administration. Mr. Rolf.
Good morning, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Dr. Rahman and honored guests, thank you for having me, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you this morning. I am going to go through a presentation very quickly. I'm packing probably 4 or 5 hours of lecture time into 15 or 20 minutes. So we're going to speak about light speed in my presentation, and if you can forgive me for going through this rather quickly. So I am going to talk about vocational education in a knowledge economy, the fourth industrial revolution. And what we heard from Dr. Ahmad and others about the need to do capacity building throughout the education system, I'm wanting you to think about what a TVET 2.0 would look like, how we need to be thinking about vocational education for a 21st century vision. Yesterday we talked a lot about the fourth industrial revolution and what that meant. And it really is a concept that people, I think, struggle with to try to really understand what we are referring to. And I thought I would give you just a couple of examples to set some context. So this is our closest celestial neighbor, Mars. It's 225 million kilometers away. And today, if you July 28th, 2017, if you were to take all of the data transmission just of today, and you were to write it onto CD-ROMs, it would stretch all the way from Earth to Mars and back again today. This is our closest star cluster, Alpha Centauri on the left. It's 4.37 light years from Earth. And there was a group of researchers recently from Southern California who estimated that if you took just the data transmission of the world's enterprise servers by 2024, and you were to write it in book form, it would stretch over a course of a year. It would stretch all the way from Earth to Alpha Centauri, 4.37 light years. So what that really means is that we will be producing in 6 years' time the book form equivalent of a light year's worth of data transmission every 83 days. Right? That is 9.4 trillion kilometers every 83 days. This is a little company in Vancouver, Canada. It's called D-Wave. D-Wave 2 years ago made the very first commercially available quantum computer. So this does not run on electrons, it runs on quarks. Right? This computer is 100 million times faster than any electron-based computer. This is not science fiction, this is real. There are 4 in production right now. Google has one, Lockheed Martin has one, NASA has one, and CERN will very soon have one. And it's running at 1,000 qubits per second, and it is really in its infancy in terms of its development. So when you think about the amount of data that is being collected, the processing capacity, it is really extraordinary. I would tell you that all of those 3 examples I just gave you were actually third industrial revolution technologies. Right? They're just accelerated. What you really see in a fourth industrial revolution is how all of these different capabilities are coming together in the synthesis of them. Right? This little thing here is almost like a baby of the fourth industrial revolution. Right? It can see, it can hear, it can sense your touch, and it can communicate. Right? It has GPS, it knows where it is, it has a gyroscope, it does all kinds of things. If you added mobility to this and a sense of smell, right, it really is creating a whole range of capabilities. And when you think about what's happening in terms of technology, and automation, we really are at a changing place where so many of those routine cognitive and routine manual processes are really going to be challenged, right? And the ability for developing economies to continue to be able to produce a labor force that is functioning on those routine cognitive and routine manual areas is going to be seriously challenged, not in the long term, but in the very near term. And we need to rethink that. We also need to rethink our whole construct around tertiary education. And I'm saying that right across the system, whether that is TVET or university, we have constructs that were created centuries ago, and the notions of how we have established them ultimately need to change. We are moving into a very different construct. So what we teach, how we teach it, and our approaches to innovation are what I'm going to talk about. So first, a couple of lessons. I would tell you, don't think that you should be trying to develop exactly what you see in developed countries. We have our own problems. So I was the Deputy Minister of Education in British Columbia for a number of years, and the challenge that we had was that for almost 60 years, Canada had a process of increasing university attainment. It has the highest level of university attainment in the OECD. And for 60 years, that was exactly the right thing to do. Every step of that educational attainment led to an improvement in both in income and in job security. Yet in about 2005, the lines between people who had a technical qualification and the people who had an undergraduate bachelor's degree crossed. And those lines have not come back yet, because the people who were doing just a generalized arts or science degree weren't able to translate that into a career-aligned role, and they remain structurally underemployed, and they do today. The same thing is happening in Australia, where I am now. So what you see is, a massive number of students doing programming that ultimately is going to be affected by automation, or in fact doesn't have industrial relevance to it now. And you still see this massive rise of students who are going into higher education, into university, yet most of the programming that they are moving into is not aligned to economic objectives. Right? The research that I have seen suggests that a student has approximately 6 to 12 months to be able to move into a career track position, or they're going to remain structurally underemployed. And that's clearly what we're seeing in the data. Only 66% of university graduates in Australia are moving into employment within the first 4 months. And the vast majority who are going into jobs aren't going into jobs that are aligned to their field of study. And yet we see within the data, that top yellow line is saying that where the job growth is actually in those technical and trade-related professions. These are my children. This is Kate, this is Ben. So Kate is 10 and Ben is 7. Ben was born in 2010, and he is going to be in the labor force until at least 2075. And we say that very quickly, and we run by that, right? As human beings, we struggle to understand that. The way I try to contextualize it is to think that Ben was born in 1910, and he was going to stay in the workforce until 1975. And the level of change that he would have experienced over that time, and yet we are now increasing, accelerating change at least tenfold over that. The truth is, we are having conversations of saying what we think students will be into the future. They are going to be an engineer, an accountant, a lawyer, an electrician. And the truth is, we can't predict what that's going to be. What we really need to be moving to is a system of where, yes, we are putting students into career-oriented positions to start with, but we need to be thinking about a broader set of capabilities that's going to allow them to pivot as economies change, as roles change, so that they can be successful in the future. So within Melbourne Polytechnic, one of the things that we are doing, both within our TVET and within our higher education programming, is trying to infuse other capabilities, other programming elements in. So whether it is around business acumen, analytics, information systems, engineering, design thinking, you name it, from advanced project management skills and a whole range of different things we are trying to embed and infuse into our programming. And within that is not just a new set of knowledge, but a whole range of underlying what I would call cross-curricular competencies. Right? We know that students will not be able to survive just by having some functional knowledge. It's about bringing a whole range of different capabilities, and I won't belabor this. We talked about this a bit yesterday. What I will talk about is how do you actually allow a student to in fact learn those things? You can't go to a textbook and learn anything on this list. It is actually in the model of how you actually educate people that enable that. So when I think about that, you have to go back to the theories about how human beings learn, right? It is very much a human process. It is an active social process, and the inquiry that a student is engaged in, the more that you can make it a real, live, consequential inquiry, where you are trying to bring a variety of different learnings together around the problem or the opportunity that a student is engaged in, that's where the real learning happens. That's where the enduring learning happens underneath that. And it's not in any one subject matter area, you're actually bringing it all together, both new kinds of learning as well as these underlying capabilities. So when you think about it, in almost every single jurisdiction and institute, we have aligned education around functional disciplines of faculties. And the truth is, where we're trying to move to is to a model that is far more transdisciplinary in nature, where we in fact are actually using real-world context environments, and that we are bringing and incorporating the learning within that. And then you bring it all together. Curriculum design, understanding both the knowledge acquisition you want, the underlying core competencies that you want to develop, and then within a pedagogic practice where teachers really do understand that their job is not to be the font of knowledge anymore. It is in fact to guide and to facilitate learning. Right? I had a conversation with Thomas yesterday about the fact that we don't allow students to fail. Failure is actually a really important part of learning, and yet we have a construct that fundamentally doesn't allow that to occur. How do you innovate? How do you grow if you in fact don't actually allow ourselves to take the time and the ability to fail? So innovation is another key area of where we are working, and I would suggest that it is a massive opportunity both for most developing countries in the world. So when we think about university research, my institute is a higher education institute as well. It follows this very traditional model. Right? We find an area of inquiry of where a student is trying to find a topic narrow enough that they can in fact actually get their PhD from it, or a professor who is trying to find a topic that in fact actually will be oriented towards what a publication wants, and the publication and citation drives that research. And yet, when in Australia we're spending $3.5 billion a year in R&D, and we have less than a 1% return on that investment, and then we wonder why industry does not engage with us in that work. And it's because we're starting from the wrong place. If you actually start with what is the opportunity, what is the challenge, and then how do we bring to bear all of that capability that institutions like ours have with other partners. So whether we are talking about data analytics, whether we're talking about existing IP, all of our emerging technologies, you bring it to bear around the opportunity, and then you teach and add into that all of these other capabilities and knowledge acquisition that you want to have. Having students involved in projects where they actually are delivering ROI to a company, right, where the work that they do is going to matter, is a massive motivator for students to be engaged. And we have, both in Australia and in Bangladesh and in other countries, an asset which we never talk about or understand. The truth is, if you look at all of the innovation disclosures, patents, trademarks, copyrights, the vast majority of them never sought a protection in countries like Australia. Australia has the lowest level of patent protection in the G20. So if you go back from 1786, the start of the patent system, to this week, only 92% of those patents ever sought a protection in Australia. Right? Over the last 5 years, it's down to 3%. I did a little bit of research before I came to this conference. Turns out that from 1786 to last week, only 71 patents ever sought protection in Bangladesh out of the 88 million patents that exist. We're talking about $2 trillion worth of innovation that sits in an ecosystem which is available, which we don't use. So when we think about research, we're always trying to move to the new thing, right? Something that hasn't existed. We rarely go back and contemplate the innovations that have come before, and then how do we integrate, how do we synthesize those? It does need to be contextualized. You can't just take somebody's idea and then just deploy it. It is about your ability to be able to leverage that. So one of the things that we did last year at Melbourne Polytechnic was we created a Center of Applied Innovation. So our center has every single innovation disclosure from 1786 to last week of all 168 WTO countries. I get a feed from every patent office of all of the innovation that is happening around the world. It includes every single contract and tender process across the OECD. I can go in and I can search, not just a search of words, but get underneath the meaning and intent that sits inside those innovation patents. And we can pull out the elements that you would want to bring to bear in the consideration of a new innovation and how you move that forward, right? And we can value those innovations. We can find innovation partners. We can look through to a supply chain and we can understand who has capability that we want to bring to bear on the challenge that we are trying to advance. And that leads me to my last point. So I don't see myself as just an education institute. I see Melbourne Polytechnic as a convener, right? It is a societal asset. It is my capacity to be able to bring industry partners in, partners from overseas, and how we in fact are working on opportunities and challenges together. Rarely does a solution exist in one place. One of the things when I talk to entrepreneurs is that your one idea is a great starting point, but don't think it's the solution. In so many instances, you will need to bring in other partners and think about other things, and it's actually the fifth iteration of how you synthesize that is in fact actually going to be the innovation that's going to get up and that's going to move. So I apologize, that was a massively quick run through a lot of the things, and hopefully we can have opportunity over the next few days to discuss that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Robert Wood, for your nice presentation and very informative also. Now may I request Mr. Untitled Chapter, as Senior Program Manager, International Organization for Migration, for the discussions.
Honorable Chief Guest, Dr. Bashir Rahman, Economic Advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister of the Government of the Republic of Bangladesh. The distinguished session chair, Dr. Shamsul Alam, the senior member of the General Economic Advisor Planning Commission of the Government of Bangladesh. Dr. Kazi Khaliquzzaman Ahmad, the chairman of TKSF, and dear distinguished participants, guests. It is my great pleasure to be here to speak on behalf of the UN Migration Agency, and I would take a bit precautions of discussing or looking at the issues of those very important papers that have been presented by honorable doctors of various different, starting from Dr. Kazi and finishing with all other papers. However, I just wanted to highlight a couple of points that we, as a migration agency, the UN Migration Agency, would like to see as a component of human mobility that is important in the TVET sector, in the development of the technical vocational training and educations globally, and particularly for this conference. And I'm very thankful to the organizer of the conference to invite us to speak. Later we will be also presenting our paper in one of the panel sessions. I hope that some of you can also listen to the labor market survey that we conducted in KSA to look at the needs of the market in the destination country for the Bangladeshi migrant workers that are working there. Looking at the topic of the session today, I just wanted to highlight a couple of points on the TVET governance, on capacity building, on the research, and going back to the points that Dr. Kazi has, and there have been a couple of very important points, particularly on the human capacity, on the skills, manpower that the honorable doctor has referred to in his speech. I think it is very important for the development of the skills and looking at how important the needs of the human being in terms of the most, I would say, the main power behind any development, particularly in this country, in Bangladesh. That is, we consider as migration agency, the main power of the development behind in this country is the people, the population of Bangladesh, which are very important, and we do emphasize the importance of investing in developing of these human beings, in their skills, in their needs, in order to meet the requirement of domestic market as well as overseas. So I would also like to particularly highlight the importance and thank the government of Bangladesh, as has been mentioned about, at the very highest level, at the Prime Minister's level, with the Honorable Prime Minister Chairman, on the opening up or setting up a national skills development authorities at the highest level to look at the importance of the development of the skills of people. And as has been mentioned, going back to another paper that has been talking about globalization and regionalizations, this is an important aspect that we as a migration agency also would like to look at this. And another point that I would also like to highlight, and it is also related to the paper that we'll be presenting later in this conference, and hopefully it will be also reflected in the proceedings of this conference for the future references, is that we have been now looking with the support of the government of Bangladesh, working together with the Minister of Expatriate Affairs and Overseas Employment and the Minister of Foreign Affairs, of the needs of the labor market survey, the survey that we are conducting, or the demand of the markets in the destination countries, to look at how we as the migration agency can support to provide skills migrant workers in those markets. Particularly as we know that there are close to 10 million, according to the government of Bangladesh, according to the Bureau of Manpower and Education Training, the Minister of Expatriate Affairs Office and Employment, there are those 10 million population of Bangladesh working outside of the country. And as we look globally, now migration or the human mobility is becoming very important. Currently, the world is witnessing the highest number of people who move. We have 1 in every 7 person who move. So if we have 7 million population in the world, around 1 billion of them are in the move, either internally or externally. So it's a very, very huge power of making sure that they are managed, they are provided support in making sure that development is considered, particularly in the country of destination or outside. So I just wanted, since the time is running short, I just wanted to again thanks the organizers of this conference, letting us present our paper and be discussing of that very important session. And I look forward to working together with all the various different sectors, various different professors and academicians of looking at the research needs of where the skills gap of the migrations is, or how we can address the migration agency and migration agency, the needs of the skills to fill in the gap internally and externally. And we will be looking forward to working with. And thank you very much once again for your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Untitled Chapter, sir. I think now this is the time for the open discussions. When you when you ask the question, please mention your name and organization. The questions, yes.
Different definitions, but the basic is they share the time, so it's 12 hours per week they go to school and 28 hours they have to work in industry or in their respective field. And this duality sometimes expresses two different learning venues, and you have the process of learning while you are working. So I underwent myself an apprenticeship program when I was younger as a bricklayer for 2.5 years. So that's quite a time that we can reflect on. And the idea is it's a community of practice. It's your co-workers. They say you want to be one of us, and then you have to make an effort. And this is something no educational system can provide. We have to be aware of this. So the outcome is basically based on we have a work process and we have theoretical input, just as I showed it here in my diagram. But it doesn't necessarily, the institutional frame is, from my point of view, as long as you success to get some industry experience into your program, and as long as you success to get more than one, to establish a workplace as a learning venue, this is from my point of view already the core of the dual system. And in Germany, what we see now, there's a trend that this duality more and more moves into higher education. We have a very strict separation of TVET and higher education. And bachelor program is in any case higher education, and anything below bachelor is vocational education. But little by little this goes into higher education, this duality, this principle of duality.
Okay, thank you, Professor Schroeder. Maybe now for the second question, Mr. Robert Wood.
Rapidly is that you missed part of. So I would not say, if you think about Australia, it has a very strong competency-based framework, and the technical foundations still need to be there. I'm not suggesting that a student should not have the proper technical qualifications, and that they will need to have some industry-focused qualification to get onto a career trajectory. What I'm suggesting is that it's insufficient for a student to be able to thrive out over the next 30, 40 years. And that the training has to go across multiple disciplines. We're doing a new advanced qualification for electricians right now around environmental sustainability. Almost all of that program is IT related. It's your capacity to be able to program controllers. It's your ability to actually set up sensors and analyze, do the analytics on data. It's not a traditional electrician's role. It's that these things start to blur, and that we need to be able to provide a broader range of training for students.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robert. I think due to time constraint, we cannot take any other questions also. So I think this is the end of the question and answer sessions. Now I think the time for our honorable chief guest. May I request our honorable chief guest, Dr. Moshiur Rahman, economic advisor to the Honorable Prime Minister, Government of Bangladesh. Dr. Moshiur Rahman.
My best regards to all of you. those on the dais and also those before me, and the invited guests, particularly the guests from abroad. I must confess that I don't know much about education and far less about technical education, having gone through humanities or when I was a student, this was known as Arts Faculty of Dhaka University. My only connection that I can claim that I had was I was Labour Secretary for some time. So let me begin with my exposure to the training schemes that they had, plus some of the training projects that I came to know about working as an official who attended the Planning Commission's meeting that cleared projects. Some Nordic countries had provided assistance for Marine Training Institute at Narayanganj. Their evaluation was that the project had failed. The reason for reaching that conclusion was that people who had trained for operation of launch engines, they were not taking their jobs. There was a leakage into automobile sector. I guess the point that should have been noted is that these people had acquired skill for dealing with automobile engineering. The engine could be fixed into a launch, it can be on the road also, motor vehicles. Since the river navigation was shrinking and we were building new roads, there was stronger demand for the road, the automobile. And this fellow was actually shifting his skill to a more remunerative occupation and also a better use of the skill that he had acquired. I think the conclusion should have been that the general training in automobile engineering at the technical level, much better use was made of it by shifting it to the road sector. There was a project for training fishermen how to acquire efficiency for better fishing. And the project envisaged that the fishermen would be brought to the training institute. There was a dormitory where they would live for some time and learn how to catch fish. I think a better idea would have been an extension program where the trainer would have gone to the fisherman where he was fishing. And the project also included some compensation for the days that he will be on training and will not actually catch fish. So when he went back, he didn't see the water body from which he could catch fish. There was a unit in Labour Ministry for manpower planning. I thought it was completely senseless because when you plan manpower training, you take into account what kind of demand will emerge, what kind of supply will be provided, etc. And I thought that the proper location for that was, or ought to have been, the Planning Commission. Recently, Bangladesh Institute of Development Studies had carried out a study on skill gap. I saw the report reported in the newspaper. It was conducted with the assistance and inspiration of the Finance Division. Now the question would be, having identified the gap, how do we address these issues which ought to come from the industries and the supply perhaps will be from the training side. So we have information, but we do not know how to incorporate the information into a program that can answer the shortfall. So there's a kind of disconnect between gathering of information and how that information fits into actual programs for addressing the deficiencies. Now I have a few horses, hobby horses, which I am tempted to ride, and you forgive me if you think that that's not fair. One is, I think, the assumption that a country has a given set of static advantage or skill is a wrong starting point. if you look at our society, there are people who have contributed to IT knowledge at the frontiers. They may not be living in Bangladesh. Some of them may be living in Bangladesh or working in several places. And there are also people who are in the informal sector, as Dr. Khaliduzzaman said. This informal sector people, they need training, their skill need to be developed and so on. So we have a spectrum of skill, and certain skills are at a high level, and I guess what we should try to examine is this distribution of skills and how the distribution can be reorganized in order to move to the higher level of skill. I guess that capability we have, and that capability we are building up by having fairly large primary and secondary education program. Enrollment is pretty high and increasing. So that's one thing that I guess we should look at. How do we use this distribution? How do we rearrange the distribution in order to move to a higher level of skill and make it much larger? Now, when I was studying abroad, I worked in a library for a while, and there were a couple of Russian students on exchange program with USA who used to come to that library. So I talked to some of them, and I found they told me that they were trained for a profession which they did not take up. They worked on something else. So there is always a shift. So I get the idea from there that training in a specific skill perhaps may not be always the best thing to do. If we assume that skill changes every 6 or 8 years, in our country maybe it will take a little longer because investment may not respond to the emerging demand. So what we should focus is how do we give people the skill so that they can update their skill, acquire the new skills and so on. I do not know what the curriculum would be, but I always felt that our vocational and technical training curriculum are fairly rigid and specific. Maybe those who do BSc engineering or masters in engineering, not to speak of PhD in engineering, they have that skill of shifting to new technology. But otherwise you get stuck in a particular skill that you have acquired. So that would perhaps require that we revisit the curriculum of technical and vocational training and emphasize at least some of the courses should focus on the basic skills that would be useful regardless of the changes in the demand for skill, and they may acquire on their own, or there may be shorter program for reorientation of it and so on. Now, having said that we do all of these things either in the public sector or in the private sector, the next question would be how do we incorporate that in the production organizations? How does an entrepreneur respond to the supply of trained manpower that may be available? How does an entrepreneur signal that a particular kind of demand is necessary? So that brings up the question of the private sector's involvement in the training program. As of now, my impression is, but Dr. Shamsuddin may correct me if I am wrong, there are more private technical institutes than public training institutes. The private technical institutes training program perhaps are not standardized. The certification procedure perhaps also need to be improved. It doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be more rigidly regulated, but those who graduate from the schools, that should signal that a graduation degree from those schools indicate a certain level of training and skill, and the employer from that certificate can make a quick judgment whether he should be hired or not. Having hired, if you find that he does not serve the purpose, maybe he can get rid of it. There will be difficult labor laws that he will have to deal with. The other problem, I guess, that we should look at is the government does prepare the programs, and the government implements programs with or without external assistance. Now, when the government prepares these plans, there's a tendency to ask for a lot of information which may not be available, or which it may take time to gather all that information. We talk about demographic dividend, labor dividend, and so on. SCAP had prepared a demographic analysis of the Asian countries some time ago that indicate that we have this window for about 20 years or so. Now, supposing we take about 6 years to implement the program that will train these people. Of this 20 years, we lose 6 years. Now, because there is a short supply, the industrial investment also perhaps would be a little slow. So that would take away a few years more. Secondly, of the 6 or 8 countries analyzed there, we are possibly third from the bottom in terms of productivity and in terms of primary education. It doesn't give data for secondary education for all the countries. So of this 20-25 years, if you take into consideration the time required for implementing the program and training the people, we are left with a narrower residual window. So we have to move very fast on that. Now, when I was trying to educate myself years ago, if Khaliquzaman does not dismiss my statement, Ian Tinbergen had written a book, Planning Without Data. Nobody reads that book, it is not available now. I had borrowed it from one of the economics professor, Musharraf Hussain, and had forgotten the detailed contents. But basically the idea was, when the Social Democrats won election in Netherlands, Ian Tinbergen, who was a professor of mathematics, was called in to prepare a plan. He didn't have data, so he simulated if certain things have certain values, what they would do. If we want that certain things should acquire certain values, how we should do it. So this was a simulation exercise that resulted in the plan which the Dutch government adopted. Now, given that we have a shrinking window of opportunity in terms of labor advantage, we should move quickly, and maybe we undertake projects without having adequate information. Now, once we meet the minimum requirement, we can then have the luxury of a better informed scheme for training. Now that brings me to one or two other observations. One is, I said before, how do we adopt how do we persuade the entrepreneurs to adopt the techniques in the production system? I guess the government can make rules, very fine rules. But the problem with rules is someone like me, some civil servant or some official will implement that rule, who may not be familiar with the specific needs of particular industries. Can we leave it to the market? And if we leave it to the market, I guess the market should be asked to face competition. If they face competition, there is a compulsion on them to be more efficient, to be more productive. So that will be, and that will generate a pressure for them to be more efficient, and they will invest and they will train. They will take interest in training. Now, what kind of industrial policy that would require? Definitely some industrial policy or some general statement about industrial policy is required. But there is also an opinion that larger scale experiment is not possible because you do not know the outcome of these experiments. So leave it to the private sector. They can undertake the small scale experiments, and those that succeed, the government may then provide generous assistance so that they can develop and face competition. if they are shielded from competition, they will look for stronger and larger shield, and there will not be a compulsion to respond to competition. The government may support the initial effort of the private sector's experiment with some tax relief or some incentive. In our situation, perhaps a tax relief works better because one has to go through a very complex procedure to claim refund of tax that they have paid. It is equally difficult to get the incentives which the government may announce. So there is a gap between what the government wants to do and what happens at the operational level. To me it seems that as one of the keynote speakers said, that it has to be done in a holistic or a comprehensive manner. That's all right. But having looked at the total picture, when we get down to the real tasks, we have to identify what exactly we want to do and whom we want to train, who is likely to hire him or her. Is there adequate incentive for the employer to get the trained people, because the trained people have more skill and they will also ask for more higher wage or higher compensation. So that is the whole range of the issues. It's a Friday, and I guess the organizers took into consideration the fact that madrasa education and technical education we have combined in the same department. So on a holiday we have picked up a holiday for this discussion. So work is prayer, work is worship. So it is a commitment that we make that we will acquire training, we will be more efficient, and it is also a virtue to be efficient and produce more for the whole nation. So those are the few remarks that I wanted to make. And if I want to write more, this will not be hobby horses, this will be hobby donkeys. So I don't want to do that. I thank the organizers for inviting me, and also all of you who kind of didn't express their boredom for what I say, but I sincerely shared with you my ignorance and concern that if we want to move ahead quickly, then we need to do certain things very rapidly and don't have to wait for adequate information, adequate analysis, because some of the things can be done on the impressionistic basis. Keep it on a reasonably low scale, but after 2-3 years that certain things work, escalate that. So that may be one way of starting with a moderate scale, and then escalating the successful ones and avoiding the flaws in our initial experiment. Thank you again, and Joy Bangla, Joy Bangla.
Distinguished participants, we have had very rich discussions at this morning, and I think this is quite befitting to the topic that you set, ultimately to have our TVET education or training, whatever we say, that meets the demand of the market in an efficient way. And you all know, in our 7 5-year plan, we targeted that our 20% youth should attain TVET education. While you all know, in South Korea, the youths, 85% of youths go to TVET or technical training centers. So they have high proportion of graduates with technical education or engineering education. So that's why in our 7 5-year plan, we emphasize a lot on human development, particularly enriching technical education to feed the need of the sustainable economic growth we are aspiring to. I would not go with a long speech. As a chair, actually, Jahangir Alam used my job, and he made my job very easy, moderating the session. And today is a Friday, you all know. And you have another session after this, and I have to rush for another program in the Prime Minister's office. What I said, Dr. Kazi Khalikuজ্জামান actually highlighted the problems, and he said we need to emphasize a lot for Tibet because we are passing the phase of demographic dividend in our population structure, so we should reap the benefit of demographic structure, where we have at least 56 million youths are now coming up in the labor force, or they are yet to join in education. So certainly that is quite demanding, and you all know technical education of Tibet is diversified in nature, from hospital receptionist to chef in the hotel, to leather technologies, to textile engineering, marine courses, nursing. So it's quite big, diversified and big spectrum in Tibet training, or demand for Tibet training. We all know we have a big mismatch with the demand for the industries and what we are providing training, or what we are giving courses in the technical training schools. Dr. Moshiur Rahman correctly diagnosed the mismatch and giving some examples how the training courses and opportunities of employment differ in providing while go with technical training and education. And we heard, we are shortage of trainers even. We don't have the required level of qualified trainers in our technical schools. Government has much emphasized in the last couple of years to go with our improving our technical education, and decided to have technical training schools at every Upazila level. And you all know government also established so many science and technical universities in different districts in our country, and we emphasize a lot for technical education now. So discussions today and the discussions in other sessions certainly will help us get the recommendations or guidelines. As a policymaker, your outputs, the seminar outputs will help us to guide us how to develop strategies for to go with to have more technically competent labor force in our country. So having said these few words, and I thank the organizers for allowing me to come to join this session as the chair and to listen to enlightened discussions with our national and foreign participants here. I thank you all for joining here, and I thank the organizers for allowing me to speak to you. Thank you very much.
This is the end of the sessions. May I request all our foreign delegates for the tea break. I think in the fifth floor. All the foreign guests, please go for the tea break in the fifth floor. And